What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. This is Guys at Magic, and I'm your host, Dave. Today, we're going over a deck tech of a card that was just recently spoiled. This is probably the best legendary creature ever printed. It's got by far the best abilities that I have ever seen. This is Yargle and Multani. It is 3, 2 black, and a green for a total of 6 mana. It is a legendary creature, Frog Spirit Elemental, and it is an 18/6, and that is everything that it does. And that's why we love this card. This is the card that goes to the gym every single day and only ever does bicep curls. It only cares about one thing: them big arms. So, with that being said, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we can make this deck work, make it hopefully more than just a meme of you showing up to your LGS or your local meta and playing with a card like this, and how we can make Yargle smash. So, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive into the deck. This is going to be a deck that I am anticipating having kind of a odd effect at the table where, although the commander doesn't actually have any abilities, is 100% completely vanilla, I do anticipate a lot of people looking at this and being kind of scared of the fact that your commander has 18 power. Especially because in this format, it only takes 21 commander damage for you to be able to knock a player out of the game, regardless of what their life total is. So I do think Yargle might draw a little bit of a hate, might draw a little bit of attention. So the way that this deck is going to be designed is we're going to try and get him out early, make sure that he swings in quickly, and to protect him as much as we possibly can. In order for us to do that, we're going to dive in and talk a little bit about some of the creatures in this list. This first group of creatures are all dedicated to making sure that Yargle hits the board earlier than anticipated. The first one here is Azusa, Lost But Seeking. This is 2 and a green for a legendary creature human monk. It's a 1/2 and says you may play 2 additional lands on each of your turns. We have a slew of mana dorks in the list to help cheat out Yargle a little bit sooner. First one here is Bird of Paradise. This is a single green mana for a creature bird. It is a 0/1 with flying that can tap to add 1 mana of any color. Elves of Deep Shadow is a green mana for a creature elf druid. It's a 1/1 that can tap for a black mana, but whenever you do it, it'll deal 1 damage to you. Elvish Mystic, Fyndhorn Elves, and Llanowar Elves are all 1 green mana for a creature elf druid. They are all 1/1s, and they all tap for a single green mana. We also have a couple of other creatures in here that aren't necessarily the mana dorks, but still help us out as well. First one here is Tireless Provisioner. This is 2 and a green for a total of 3 mana. It's a creature elf scout. It's a 3/2 with landfall. It says whenever land enters battlefield under your control, create a food token or a treasure token. I love the ability for you to be able to make those treasure tokens, potentially store them up for something later on too. Tireless Provisioner is one of my favorite cards in the format. We also have Savalva, Heart of the Wilds in this list. She is 1 and 2 green for a total of 3 mana for a legendary creature elf scout. It's a 2/3 and it says whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. Well, so long as we have Yargle, we won't have to worry about that. You can also pay green and tap her to add X mana in any combination of colors to your mana pool, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. You can see the synergies and why this is so insane. Next up, we have Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia. This is 2 and a green for a total of 3 mana. It's a legendary creature elf druid scout. It's a 2/3 that you can tap to add 2 mana in any combination of colors. You can spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures or creature cards. And it says whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, put a +1/+1 counter on Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia and untap it. So nice little mana dork there. Lastly, to wrap up the rest of this package, we do have Goreclaw, Terror of Calcisma. This is 3 and a green for a legendary creature bear. It's a 4/3. It says creatures you cast with power 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast. It also says whenever it attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. So not only does this form as a little bit of a piece of ramp, but it also helps to further buff Yargle and give it trample. We have 2 creatures in this list that are designed to just mainly make sure that Yargle gets out a little bit uncontested. The first one here is Allosaurus Shepherd. This is a single green mana for an elf shaman. It's a 1/1. It says that it can't be countered, and green spells you control cannot be countered. It also has another ability stapled onto it where you can pay 4 and 2 green. And it says until end of turn, each elf creature you control has base power and toughness equal to 5/5 and become a dinosaur in addition to their other creature types. There are actually a fairly decent number of elves in this, so that might serve as a pseudo kind of like secondary win con if you need it. Destiny Spinner is also in this list. It is 1 and a green for an enchantment creature human. It's a 2/3 and says creatures and enchantment spells you control can't be countered. You can also pay 3 and a green for a target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste until end of turn, where X is the number of enchantments you control. It is still a land. Just to give you a heads up, there are a total of, I think, 5 enchantments in the entire deck, including this card, so not going to be something that we're probably ever going to do. We have a couple creatures that are going to make the cut in here just simply because they work really well with Yargle. The first one here is Falthis Shadowcat Familiar. This is 2 and a black for a legendary creature, Nightmare Cat. It is a 2/2 that says commanders you control have Menace and Death Touch. It's also got Partner, but that's kind of irrelevant here. I love the fact that we can not only make Yargle even a little bit more scary, but just in case, we can give it Death Touch for whatever reason. We're going to be throwing God Eternal Ronus in here. This is 3 and 2 green for a legendary creature zombie god. It's a 5/5 with Death Touch, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, double the power of each other creature you control until end of turn. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. It also says whenever it dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it into its owner's library, 3rd from the top. God Eternal Ronus does a wonderful job of making sure that Yargle, at only an 18/6, gets a bit of a power boost. Ronus the Indomitable is also going to be in this list. This is 2 and a green for a legendary creature god. It's a 5/5 with Death Touch and Indestructible. It says that it can't attack or block unless you control another creature with power 4 or greater. And you can pay 2 and a green to give another target creature +2/+0 and trample until end of turn. The trample really being especially important for a creature like Yargle. Next up, it is her time to shine. We have Ruxa Patient Professor. This is 2 and 2 green for a total of 4 mana. It's a legendary creature bear druid. It's a 4/4 and says it whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, return target creature card with no abilities from your graveyard to your hand. It says creatures you control with no abilities get +1/+1, and you may have creatures you control with no abilities assign their combat damage as though they weren't blocked. So that last little piece there is super important in a deck like this. And is probably going to be completely irrelevant outside of Yargle. We also have Zapandrel Hunger Dominus in this list. This is 5 and 2 green for a legendary creature, Phyrexian Horror. It is a 4/6 with reach and says at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. You can pay 2 Phyrexian green and sacrifice 2 other creatures to put an indestructible counter on this card. Don't think we're probably ever going to do that, but I do love the fact that it does boost Yargle even further, because that's just going to get ridiculous. 2 other creature cards that work really well with Yargle. The first one here is Jared Golgari Lichlord. This is 2 black and 2 green for a total of 4 mana. It's a legendary creature zombie elf. It's a 2/2. It says it gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, which is not actually something we care about. But it says that you can pay 1 a black and a green, sacrifice another creature, and each opponent loses life equal to the sacrificed creature's power. We happen to have a bomb that we can blow up in our command zone, so that's really cool. And if you ever need to, you can always sacrifice both a swamp and a forest to return Jared from your graveyard to your hand. Also, as just kind of a ridiculous one more super fun card that we're going to throw in this deck, we have Old Gnawbone. Old Gnawbone is 5 and 2 green for a total of 7 mana. It's a legendary creature dragon. It is a 7/7 with flying and says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. I just get giddy at the idea of making 18 treasure tokens whenever we smack somebody with Yargle. So the last 4 cards that we have included in this list are mainly just going to be here to provide some support. The first one here is Eternal Witness. This is 1 and 2 green for a creature human shaman. It's a 2/1. Says whenever it enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. We have Toski, Bearer of Secrets. This is 3 and a green for a total of 4 mana. It's a legendary creature squirrel. It is a 1/1 that cannot be countered, has indestructible, and must attack each combat if able. It also says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So a little bit of card draw stapled onto a creature like this, plus he's just kind of pesky. We have Scavenging Ooze making the cut here. This is 1 and a green for a creature ooze. It is a 2/2 that you can pay a green and exile a card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, put a +1/+1 counter on Scavenging Ooze and you gain 1 life. I love Scavenging Ooze in just about every green deck because it shuts down graveyard strategies while also providing you with a cheap and efficient threat. Lastly here we have Reclamation Sage. This is 2 and a green for a creature elf shaman. It's a 2/1 that says whenever it enters the battlefield you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, I am anticipating our opponents trying to kill Yargle maybe a couple of times, making him too expensive for us to be able to utilize. One of the best ways for us to be able to make sure that Yargle never gets too expensive is by ramping like crazy and making sure that we can just always afford to cast him. So, diving in with our first group of instants and sorceries, we have a bunch of cards that are going to help us to ramp up. The first one here is Explore. This is 1 and a green for a sorcery. It says you may play an additional land this turn, draw a card. 3 Visits is 1 and a green for a sorcery. It says search your library for a forest card, put it on the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. Super important to note here, it does not say tapped, and it does not say basic forest either. So if you happen to have a shock land, which, spoilers, this deck does, you can go grab it. Nature's Lore is 1 and a green for a sorcery. It says search your library for a forest card, put the card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Kodama's Reach is 2 and a green for a sorcery, Arcane. It says search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards, put one on the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, then shuffle. Migration Path is 3 and a green for a sorcery. It says search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. And if you happen to draw this a little bit later on in the game and maybe you don't need it, it's got a cycling cost of 2. Lastly here, we have Farseek, which is 1 and a green for a sorcery. It says search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So anything but a forest. As we continue to talk about some of our instants and sorceries, it is important that we bring up our removal package. So we do kind of have like 2.5 pseudo sweepers. So let's go ahead and dive in with those first. The first one here being Culling Ritual. This is 2, a black, and a green for a total of 4 mana. It's a sorcery and says destroy each non-land permanent with a mana value of 2 or less. You'll add a black or a green for each permanent destroyed this way. So this will take care of all of your opponent's pesky little creatures. It gets rid of all of their tokens. This probably also blows up quite a bit of mana rocks. Do keep in mind though, this hits your stuff too. So if you are overextending or if you happen to have a couple of mana dorks already in play, Culling Ritual might not necessarily help you out. But if you're trying to get back into the game after somebody did just board wipe, Culling Ritual can be a great way for you to not only be able to ramp up your own stuff, but also take out your opponent's artifact ramp. So I do love this card a lot. Damnation is going to be making this list. This is 2 and 2 black for a total of 4 mana for a sorcery that says destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. Toxic Deluge, also making the cut here, is 2 and a black for a sorcery that says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, pay X life. All creatures get -X until end of turn. Now, obviously, Toxic Deluge and Damnation are cards that you don't really want to be casting if you do happen to have a decent board state, or if your commander's in play. However, they are panic buttons. If you need to, go ahead and pop them. Really just kind of keep in mind, you're going to be losing some stuff on the exchange as well. As far as single target removal in this list, the first card we have here is Infernal Grasp. This is 1 and a black for a total of 2 mana. It's an instant that says destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. We have Nature's Way, which is 1 and a green for a sorcery. It says target creature you control gains vigilance and trample until end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So this does allow us to be able to take out one of our opponent's creatures. Chances are Yargle is probably going to be better and bigger than whatever it is that they happen to have. Plus, this also gives him trample, which is really nice. We have Assassin's Trophy in this list. It's a black and a green for an instant. It says destroy target permanent and opponent controls. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Beast Within is 2 and a green for an instant. It says destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. And Putrefy is 1 a black and a green for an instant. It says destroy target artifact or creature. It can't be regenerated. So for the most part, that's going to just kind of wrap up our creature removal or just general removal package. Ideally, we don't actually have a ton in this deck. We basically just want to be making sure that our opponents don't happen to have any cards or any creatures in play. They need to be shutting our strategies down because, well, I mean, Yargle's going to be able to probably push in for damage and just flat out going to be bigger than whatever our opponent is blocking with. A couple of instances that we are going to throw into this list to make sure that Yargle does stick around, however. The first one here is Autumn's Veil. This is a single green mana for an instant that says spells you control can't be countered by blue or black spells this turn, and creatures you control can't be the targets of blue or black spells this turn. Veil of Summer is a very similar card. It is a single green mana for an instant. It says draw a card if an opponent has cast a blue or black spell this turn. Spells you control can't be countered this turn, and you and permanents you control gain hexproof from blue and from black until end of turn. So both of these cards are allowing us to make sure that Yargle ends up hitting the field. That way we can kind of play around in the case our opponents are holding up a counter. These cards will allow us to force it through. Plus, the ability to give hexproof from black is pretty relevant. That means that we will at least be able to dodge some removal. In addition to both Autumn's Veil and Veil of Summer, we also have Savage Summoning in this list. This is a single green mana for an instant. It says it can't be countered. It also says the next creature card you cast this turn can be cast as though it had flash. It says that spell can't be countered, and the creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So, helps us to be able to fight off that counter war once again, and then also provides a minimal buff there to Yargle. Heroic Intervention is 1 and a green for an instant that says permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. And Snakeskin Veil is a single green mana for an instant that says put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains hexproof until end of turn. So both of those cards allowing us to protect Yargle. To wrap up the rest of our instants and sorceries, we have a slew of cards that work beautifully well with a creature like Yargle just because it has so much power. So the first one here is Return of the Wild Speaker. This is 4 and a green for an instant. It says choose one. The first mode says draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. The second mode says non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. Return of the Wild Speaker in a list like this is absolutely insane. The reason why is because the first mode, so long as you have your commander in play, says draw 18 cards. The second mode, so long as you have your commander in play and potentially you're attacking with it, says your commander can now hit for 21 damage. So do keep in mind, both of the modes are absolutely insane, and although somewhat situational depending on which one you want to use, you're probably killing a player or winning the game off the back of this card. Next up, we have Rishkar's Expertise. This is 4 and 2 green for a sorcery. It says draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. You may cast a card with converted mana cost of 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So same kind of thing that I mentioned with Return of the Wild Speaker. Paying 6 mana for Rishkar's Expertise to potentially draw 18 cards and then cast a 5-drop for free is nutty. Hunter's Insight is 2 and a green for an instant that says choose target creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker this turn, draw that many cards. So if you haven't so far picked up on the theme here, the card draw is absolutely insane with our commander. Some additional ways that we can go ahead and push for some extra damage here. We do have another instant in here in Charge Through. This is a single green mana for an instant. It says target creature gains trample until end of turn, draw a card. So a nice little way for us to be able to instant speed give Yargle trample while also cantripping on this. And then we have a couple of cards that are probably just going to end up winning you the game or just kill a player. The first one here being Tainted Strike. This is a single black mana for an instant. It says target creature gets +1/+0 and gains infect until end of turn. 19 poison counters is more than enough to kill somebody. Triumph of the Hordes is 2 and 2 green for a sorcery, saying that until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1, trample, and infect. So same kind of thing here, coming in as just a kill spell for somebody. And then lastly, we have Overwhelming Stampede. This is 3 and 2 green for a sorcery that says until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Now, I really love this last card, and the reason why is because remember all those little mana dorks we happen to have earlier on, the ones that are sitting around not really doing a whole lot in the later portion of the game? Well, if we have a commander in play, that massive boost is probably going to give our small creatures enough power for them to just be able to overwhelm the board and kill all of our opponents. We're going to talk about some of the artifacts. The first group here are all artifacts that are going to help us out with ramp. I'm not going to talk about most of them because I feel like for the most part they're just kind of common knowledge. We have Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Talisman of Resilience, Golgari Signet, and Felwar Stone that are all going to be making the list here. Those all help to just kind of give you a little bit of extra mana, potentially smooth over your mana base, and make sure Yargle comes out earlier. Now, we also have one other card, but I did want to talk about this one at least a little bit, and that's going to be Thought Vessel. It's 2 mana for an artifact that can tap to add a colorless to your mana pool, but it also says you have no maximum hand size. With our ability to draw so many cards with, well, a lot of our draw engines are just single-use effects in the deck, I do think that it is really important to have a card like Thought Vessel in this list, because if you are drawing 18 cards, off the back of something like a Rishkar's Expertise, you don't really want to pitch all those cards away, so Thought Vessel can be a wonderful way to make sure that you are capitalizing on all that card draw. We do have several equipment in this list that are going to help to make sure that Yargle's pushing through for damage, and making sure that our opponent is in as much pain as possible. The first one here is Commander's Plate. This is a single mana for an artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature gets +3/+3, has protection from each color that is not in your commander's color identity. It has an equip cost for a commander of 3 and an equip cost for any other creature of 5. So Commander's Plate not only providing protection, but also allowing our creature to be a little bit more difficult to be blocked, and providing a very critical power boost. +3/+3 means that Yargle turns into a 1-hit kill, having 21 power. Whisper's Silk Cloak is 3 mana for an artifact equipment. It says that the equipped creature is unblockable and has Shroud and has an equip cost of 2. Loxodon Warhammer is 3 mana for an artifact equipment. It's got an equip cost of 3 and says that the equipped creature gets +3/+0, has trample and lifelink. So all very relevant, all very important, and similarly to Commander's Plate, boost Yargle up to that magic 21 power. We did have quite a bit of money left over in the budget of this deck, so I did also throw in Sword of Feast and Famine. If you're trying to build this for a little bit more budget, since this probably would be the first card that I would remove here, is at the time of this recording, this is about a $40 card. But Sword of Feast and Famine is 3 mana for an artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from black and from green. It says whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card and you untap all lands you control. It's got an equip cost of 2. So I did think that it was important just to be able to give that additional little bit of protection there. Also hoping to just kind of like dodge any of our opponent's pesky removal. Plus, having access to all of your lands a second time is a very powerful effect. Swiftfoot Boots is in this list. This is 2 mana for an artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature has hexproof and haste and has an equip cost of just 1. Now, kind of a little bit of an interesting thing here is that I don't have Lightning Greaves included in this list. I actually do prefer Swiftfoot Boots here. And I know that that might sound a little bit odd because to many players, you just kind of look at Lightning Greaves as being better than Swiftfoot Boots. But because it gives hexproof and not Shroud, and because we do have many things in the deck that want to actually target Yargle, I did think that the hexproof was a little bit of enough of an advantage to warrant why Swiftfoot Boots should be in the list. We have Trailblazer's Boots in here as well. This is 2 mana for an artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature has non-basic land walk and an equip cost of 2. In a format like EDH, I do feel like non-basic land walk is pretty much just going to mean that your creature just can't be blocked about 95% of the time. And then the last equipment that we're going to talk about is Helm of the Host. This is 4 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. It says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of the equipped creature, except that the token isn't legendary if the equipped creature is legendary, and that token gains haste. It's got an equip cost of 5. I figured if anything was better than just a Yargle, it was 2 Yargles. We have 4 enchantments that we're going to talk about that are going to help to support this list. The first one is Boar Umbra. This is 2 and a green for an enchantment aura. It says enchant creature. The enchanted creature gets +3/+3, and it has totem armor. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the way that it works is says, if the enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. So the Boar Umbra will die instead. A little bit of protection, also boosting Yargle up to 21 power. We have Unnatural Growth in this list. This is 1 and 4 green for a total of 5 mana. It's an enchantment that says at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. We're going to make the big things even bigger. Kenrith's Transformation is 1 and a green for an enchantment aura. It says enchant creature. Whenever it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and then the enchant creature loses all abilities and is a green elk creature with base power and toughness 3/3. Don't use this on your commander, please. And then lastly, we have Garruk's Uprising. This is 2 and a green for an enchantment. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. We have a single Planeswalker in this deck that is going to go about supporting us, and it is Garruk Primal Hunter. Garruk Primal Hunter is 2 and 3 green for a total of 5 mana. It's a legendary Planeswalker that enters with 3 loyalty. Its first mode is a +1 that says create a 3/3 green beast creature token. And as fine as that is, we're probably never going to use it because its -3 is where the power is at. At -3, it says draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. With a commander in play, once again, that magic number is at 18. Now, do keep in mind, it will kill Garruk immediately because you're going to drop him down to 0 loyalty if you haven't plussed him first. But paying 5 mana to draw 18 cards is a rate that I will happily do over and over and over again. Lastly, in the case he does manage to stick around and your opponents just can't deal with this card for whatever reason, you do have a -6 stapled onto him where it says create a 6/6 green worm creature token for each land you control. So that's nice. As far as the lands in this deck, the first group that we're going to talk about are here to help support our deck. So these are all going to be providing some degree of utility. The first one here is Reliquary Tower. It's a land that can tap for a colorless and says you have no maximum hand size. Same kind of argument as to what I mentioned earlier with Thought Vessel. Reliquary Tower is a card that really needs to be in this deck. Rogue's Passage is a land that can tap for a colorless, so you can pay 4, tap it, and target creature cannot be blocked this turn. War Room is a land that you can tap to add a colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can pay 3 and tap it and pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity to draw a card. And Castle Lochvane is a land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a swamp. It can tap for a black itself, or you can pay 1 and 2 black to tap it and draw a card. Then you lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. We have a couple of lands in here that are going to make sure that it can tap for either black or green. The first one, of course, being Command Tower. You can tap it and add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Llanowar Wastes is a land that you can tap for either a colorless mana, or you can tap it for a black or a green, but if you do, it'll deal 1 damage to you. Woodland Cemetery enters the battlefield tapped unless you control either a swamp or a forest, and later on it can tap for a black or a green. Deathcap Glade enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. It says that you can tap it and add either a black or a green. Tainted Wood is a land that can tap for a colorless, or you can tap for a black or a green, so long as you control a swamp. Overgrown Tomb is a land swamp forest. It is the shock of these colors. It says that it enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, Overgrown Tomb enters the battlefield tapped. And lastly here we have Undergrowth Stadium. This is a land that says it enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents, and you can tap it for either a black or a green. To go ahead and wrap up the rest of this, we do have 12 forests and 9 swamps that are going to finish up the rest of the list. Now, just give you a heads up, this is a deck that is going to come in at about $350, at least as of the time of this recording. And do keep in mind that Yargle and Multani, at the time of this recording at least, is actually not out yet. So the price of that card might fluctuate quite a bit. If you are looking to build this a little bit more on the budget end, there are some cards in here that you could probably take out. Both of the board wipes that I chose to include in here are a little bit more on the expensive side. And then, of course, a Sword of Feast and Famine is another card that you could probably cut pretty easily from this list. With that being said, however, I do think that Yargle is quite a bit of fun, definitely more than just a meme. This is a card and a deck that can just kind of win out of nowhere, and definitely a deck that your opponents are going to have to keep an eye on Yargle. It doesn't have any abilities, but this is a card that just, with having so much power, is really going to have to keep your opponents on their toes and make sure that they have either a removal spell or a blocker up or something to be able to make sure that this doesn't connect. So I do think that Yargle and Multani is quite a bit of fun. As always, we love all the feedback that we get from y'all. Do me a huge favor, make sure that you like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and then leave a comment down below to this video. Let me know what you would have done differently. Is there another legendary creature, or maybe one of the other legendary creature pairings, as we're seeing kind of come out from March of the Machine, that you would like us to do a deck tech on? If you haven't done so already, please make sure that you follow us on our other social media sites as well. Until next time, thank you once again for all the love and support, and this has been Guys That Magic. Peace.